we are dropping you right into the worst wake-up call imaginable. This is not just waking up in the wrong place. It's waking up and realizing the person you trusted with your very existence has fundamentally betrayed you.
And that betrayal is now the basis of your new terrifying reality.
Exactly.
That is precisely our focus today. We are unpacking an intensely high-stakes scenario,
Yeah.
and it's all built on, well, on desperation and kind of scientific hubris. We have this chilling first-hand account of a man confronting the deadly affliction of leprosy.
Mm-hmm.
He agrees to cheat death and then discovers that his friend, the eminent surgeon Marshall Andrews, had a far more macabre plan for his survival.
So our mission for this deep dive is to track that precise, agonizing sequence of events. How did our narrator go from trusting Andrews implicitly to a terror so profound it drove him to immediate, brutal violence?
We really need to dissect the psychological shifts, the little physical clues that must have been maddening, and just the complete decay of their relationship. It all culminates in discovery so gruesome it redefines his entire concept of self.
And the sources establish this atmosphere of dread immediately. I mean, from the very first moment.
Right. When the narrator awakens from this profound drug-induced sleep, he knows Andrew's plan for resurrection has succeeded on some level, but the setting itself just screams that something is terribly, terribly wrong.
He's lying in this massive four-poster bed, but the perspective is all distorted. It's almost mocking him. The sources say the bedposts rear upward in a dizzy perspective.
It's not a comforting image.
No. It's a room defined by unease. He notices the windows, and instead of, the usual light, cheerful dressings you'd expect in a recovery room, the light curtains are gone. They're replaced by somber black hangings, catching this kind of ghostly luster in the faint light.
The light is filtering through these narrow stained windows. So this isn't a healing environment. It's a dungeon draped in mourning cloth.
It's a fortress.
It speaks to that immediate feeling of entrapment. It's not just a medical recovery room. It's a stage set for a gothic horror. And he instantly recalls the past year of his confinement in this ancient house, which he describes as a veritable medieval fortress.
Perched precariously atop these crags overlooking the crumbling town of Hampton.
Yeah.
And that context is absolutely everything. He was forced to choose between a true, slow death from leprosy, which meant social shaming and exile, or this hypothetical one, a brief, controlled death.
Followed by reanimation.
Using methods that only Andrews, this controversial surgeon, understood, we have to remember that this choice, it was rooted in just absolute despair over the yellow shadow of his disease.
Let's unpack that desperation, because it's the foundation of everything. It's what allows Andrews to manipulate him so completely. The leprosy diagnosis is the catalyst for it all.
He contracted it in the Philippines, right, while he was caring for his brother.
Exactly. And at that time, that diagnosis meant immediate, terrifying social consequences. As soon as Andrews confirmed it, the narrator's life as he knew it was over. He was immediately exiled.
Confined to their shared ancient home atop the crags, living what he calls a terrible existence of banishment. He couldn't go out. His life just became this sequestration.
And the only reason he wasn't immediately discovered and, shipped off by the authorities was because of Andrew's intervention. The surgeon, despite his widespread fame, or maybe because of it, had this locally known, somewhat sinister reputation.
But his influence, his professional status, it was enough to keep the narrator's plight a secret, to stave off the official intervention that would have, sent him to a leper colony.
But you have to ask, was that protection really driven by genuine friendship?
Right. Or was he just securing his prime research subject? It feels less like protection and more like warehousing him, keeping him on ice for later.
That's a crucial distinction, isn't it? For nearly a year, Andrews maintained the appearance of protection. He made sure his friend had a tolerable life, despite the curse. But the moment an opportunity for his own interests arose, that whole pretense it dissolved.
And that's when Andrews announces he's going away.
The pivotal shift, yeah. He announces a 4-month trip to the West Indies, ostensibly to study native medical methods. He leaves the narrator in the care of the household factotum, the old servant, Symes.
And this 4-month period of solitude, this is critical for the narrator's perception of his friend. He's alone, he's vulnerable, he's trying to distract himself, and so he starts reading books from Andrews' professional library.
He was probably looking for some kind of solace, some medical understanding.
But what he found was the key to understanding Andrews' shady local reputation.
And these texts he discovered, they weren't your standard medical school textbooks. They were deeply, fundamentally troubling. We're talking detailed treatises on monstrous experiments in surgery, accounts of glandular transplantation, rejuvenation.
And even fanatical speculations, things like attempted brain transference.
We can't just gloss over those titles. Think about what those practices represented in that era. Glandular transplantation, rejuvenation. This was fringe stuff. It was often seen as unethical, trying to circumvent aging or change fundamental human biology.
And brain transference, that's not science. That is straight up playing God.
So this explains why Andrew's fame was sinister. He was renowned, yes, but clearly operating far, far outside any acceptable professional bounds.
So the narrator, who's already suffering from this awful terminal affliction, is now reading about these bizarre procedures. It's like he's undergoing the subtle psychological preconditioning.
Absolutely. The texts, as he looks back on them, became hellishly suggestive when he associated them with what Andrews later proposed.
Right.
They were the first terrifying hint that his friend's interests were clinical, not compassionate.
The foundation of trust was already eroding then, just through textual evidence before the Great Deception even began.
And then Andrews returns. It's early in November, and he's exuberant. He's ready to pitch his grand scheme.
The timing is important, too. The narrator's leprosy was finally becoming subtly noticeable, which was pushing him toward absolute, permanent privacy. His anxiety level must have been at an absolute peak.
And into that anxiety, Andrews offers a solution that eclipses the fear of exile. He claims to have found a curious drug from a native doctor in Haiti, and the description of this drug is just horrifying in its effectiveness.
He laid the whole grisly scheme out in that dimly lit study. The drug, he explained, would induce a state of profound sleep. It would counterfeit death so closely that it could fool any professional examiner.
Respiration, heartbeat, muscular reflexes, all completely stilled.
What's fascinating is the level of detail Andrews must have provided. He had to convince the narrator, who was clearly medically literate from his reading, that this drug was foolproof.
He even mentioned it would develop a slight rigor mortis in prolonged cases. Andrews guaranteed it would pass the closest examination of any medical man. That was a key element for the whole deception to work.
The purpose was coldly pragmatic, almost bureaucratic. Andrews would administer the drug, report the death as heart failure due to nerve strain to the authorities, and secure immediate, unembalmed burial.
And because the leprosy symptoms were only about 15 months into their expected 7-year course, they were subtle enough that a careless examination would miss them. Quick burial was the priority.
The trade-off was absolute. The narrator saw this as his only escape from the banishment and shame of a conventional, slow death. He chose potential resurrection over guaranteed social oblivion and public decay.
But, understandably, the acceptance was riddled with what he calls a myriad of misgivings. The thought of waking up in the tomb, or what if the coroner discovered the deception? That must have been a daily horror leading up to it.
You really have to reflect on that state of mind. Choosing temporary death and potential resurrection based solely on the word of a man whose library includes books on attempted brain transfers, it speaks to a desperation that's beyond our typical understanding.
He traded the certainty of a slow, conventional death for the terrifying uncertainty of a surgical masterpiece.
Once he agreed, the plan moved with just frightening speed. The drug was administered, leading to a profound night-black sleep.
He was spared the trauma of his own funeral, which is maybe a small mercy, and everything proceeded just as Andrews designed. No embalming, a quick burial late on the 3rd day, and then the final ghoulish task.
Andrews and the factotum, old Symes, who was clearly complicit, sworn to secrecy. They secured the body that same night from the family graveyard.
It was only a quarter-mile from Andrews' crumbling manor. They'd just transported it back to the fortress.
And this is where the real horror begins, the agonizing recovery. The narrator lay in that bed for over a week, fully conscious, totally alert, but completely paralyzed from the neck down.
His mind was alive, trapped in a corpse-like body. He could only move his head slightly. This was the start of his true, excruciating confinement.
That week of conscious paralysis is arguably the most brutal phase. It's perfect psychological torture. Imagine a living mind trapped inside a dead, unresponsive shell.
He felt a total alienation from his numb hulk. He describes it as if it had been injected with a perpetual anesthetic, even though his head and neck were functionally alive and feeling.
Every minute must have felt like an eternity, knowing he was completely at the mercy of the man he already suspected of something monstrous.
And Andrew's reaction to this paralysis is the first major red flag that confirms all the narrator's suspicions.
His explanation for it was so unsettlingly cavalier. He claimed he'd managed to revive the upper half first, but he just couldn't account for the complete bodily paralysis below the neck.
But the truly damning part is his attitude. This major, unexplained physiological failure troubled him little.
Right. It says he was far more focused on the damnably intent interest he had in the narrator's daily reactions and symptoms.
Why wouldn't a doctor panic? Why wouldn't he be intensely focused on fixing the paralysis?
Because he wasn't interested in fixing it. He was coldly analyzing its effect. He was treating the narrator like an experimental model, not a patient.
And this is the moment the relationship completely curdles. The narrator realizes he's no longer a friend, but an implement in his skilled and greedy fingers.
The facade of friendship is gone. Andrews has dropped it, and he's revealing these unexpected dark traits that weren't there before the diagnosis.
And we get concrete evidence of cruelty that was apparently noticeable even to Symes, the longtime servant.
Andrews was conducting these hidden projects in his laboratory. We're told about glandular and muscular transplantation on guinea pigs and rabbits. He was also using his sleeping potion for these curious suspended animation tests.
Now let's just zoom in on that. If you are trapped in silence, fully aware, every single external sound becomes a horrifying countdown. The cries of those animals rasped hideously on the narrator's already overwrought nerves.
So he's experiencing paralysis, isolation, and the constant sound of surgical torture echoing from the lab next door. It's all reinforcing the horrifying belief that he is next.
This is psychological warfare, whether it's delivered or not. Andrews was no longer trying to heal him. He was using him as a primary observation subject.
The narrator catches a strange gleam, a glint of victorious exultation in Andrews' eyes that was never actually spoken out loud. Andrews seemed glad the patient survived death, but for entirely selfish reasons.
And then he promised him an existence few men had ever experienced.
It's chilling.
At the time, maybe the narrator clung to the hope that this meant some unique medical freedom and escape from the curse of leprosy. But looking back, knowing about the experiments in that glint in Andrews' eye, those words take on a ghastly meaning.
That he was intended for something altogether monstrous, maybe a public scientific demonstration or the culmination of one of those monstrous experiments he read about.
It begs the question, why wouldn't Andrews just admit his motive? Why hide his intent interest? What does that say about his ego?
It suggests a profound narcissism. He wasn't looking for pure validation. He was seeking mastery, maybe even a kind of artistic perfection in his work.
Right. He didn't want the subject to know the full scope of the masterpiece until it was finished. Admitting his plan would risk the narrator's cooperation and potentially his mental stability, which Andrews needed to observe for his data.
The secrecy just amplified the power dynamic, reinforcing his total control over this paralyzed, helpless man.
As the confinement stretched on and the paralysis slowly receded, the physical horror didn't lessen. In fact, it amplified through what he calls physical estrangement.
So the return of feeling was not a relief.
Not at all. This is the stage where the physical reality starts to completely contradict his internal sense of self, and that leads to this acute paranoia.
The physical evidence of his body malfunctioning is terrifying. When the use of his limbs finally came back, his movements were jerky and uncertain. His hands were woefully clumsy.
He had to literally become accustomed to them all over again. Imagine that, having to relearn how to use your own hands.
And crucially, he had a plausible internal explanation for this malfunction. He feared this clumsiness was the visible physical progression of the leprosy.
He was substituting one horror, leprosy decay, for the unthinkable horror he was actually experiencing, which was physical replacement. It's a devastating internal misdiagnosis.
And his belief in that misdiagnosis allowed Andrews to continue his manipulations completely unchallenged.
But there was one physical observation that defied even the leprosy explanation, that bizarre instruction.
That's the detail that just screams concealment. When Andrews finally permitted him to sit up, which was a huge milestone, he cautioned me to keep the blankets well up around my chin so that I would not be chilled.
And the narrator immediately noted this was strange. The room was comfortably warm for late autumn. Why the chin? Why the absolute concealment of the lower body?
It's the ultimate confirmation that Andrews has performed some surgical alteration that must remain unseen, even by the subject himself. It's an instruction that just overrides common sense and the weather. It's a desperate measure to hide the scope of the operation.
And if his physical state wasn't enough, mentally, the situation began to fracture violently. The dreams began,
tormenting him day and night. And these weren't just bad dreams. They were relentless vistas of ghoulish things, stalking corpses, graveyards, catacombs. He describes them as having a terrible reality.
This is where we have to delve into the question of consciousness alteration. He started believing some inside influence was inducing these grisly scenes.
So this isn't just trauma-induced nightmares.
No, it suggests a mental intrusion, perhaps a lasting side effect of that Haitian drug, or a fundamental change in his nervous system that allowed him to tap into something profoundly dark.
That's a chilling thought. Was the drug, which counterfeited death so perfectly, also capable of altering his brain chemistry, making him hyper-aware of decay or death, even on a subconscious level?
He's not just dreaming about death, he's dreaming from the perspective of the grave.
The psychological pressure of it all, the physical alienation, the constant surveillance, the intrusive nightmares, it eventually solidified his resolve.
The realization dawned. Andrews had not saved him for friendship, but for some accursed reason. This wasn't friendship, it was captivity.
And the transformation in Andrews's own appearance mirrored this psychological deterioration. The surgeon's features were now lined and whisker-grown, and his eyes, rather than friendly or scientific, they gleamed as if some imp of Satan were staring from them.
He looked manic, obsessive, morally bankrupt. The dynamic became almost unbearable.
Andrews would stand in the doorway just staring with this crafty alertness, constantly fingering his scalpel.
That tool of his trade became a symbol of perpetual threat.
And even Symes, the factotum, was now neglectful. He seemed complicit in the deviltry, just refusing to acknowledge the narrator's suffering.
So the narrator resolved that escape was the only option. But he knew he couldn't rely on his recently revived clumsy body. He began secretly cultivating a new, strange sort of strength that was vibrating through him, a physical readiness he had to conceal from Andrews.
This strength is a massive point of tension. It feels alien to him, yet absolutely necessary for survival.
He is preparing for a violent confrontation. The paralysis is gone, replaced by clumsiness and this mysterious, potent strength. He is actively testing the limits of this new physical shell, understanding that the crisis he anticipated from the moment he woke up is now imminent.
The paranoia is acute, the body feels alien, and the dreams are terrifying. The time for waiting is over. We have reached the critical breaking point. The violent escape.
It begins on a chilly evening, bathed in pale moonlight. The narrator, calculating that Andrews and Symes are asleep, initiates his plan.
He struggles immediately. He has to battle vertigo and residual weakness just to rise and stand, clutching the bedpost for support.
Yet that new strength he had cultivated, that strange vibrating energy, starts coursing through him. It lends him the necessary power to overcome his recent convalescence.
And the small, subtle clues continue to mount. He dons a long, dark robe. And then there's the shoe detail. He slips on what he believed was his old shoes, but they seemed abnormally loose.
He quickly dismisses the discrepancy, deciding they must belong to Symes. But for us, for you, listening, this is the second major physical clue, after the keep the blankets up command, that indicates his body size or structure has been altered.
He has no time to dwell on loose footwear, though. He needs a weapon.
He seizes the only heavy object available, the massive candelabrum glinting in the moonlight. This is no surgical scalpel or subtle poison. This is a heavy, blunt instrument, signaling the sheer brutality he is prepared to unleash.
He moves, navigating the house jerkily, toward the laboratory door. And he finds Andrews, not safely tucked away in bed, but seated in his laboratory, half reclining in an overstuffed chair.
He's drunk, immersed in a hideous tome from his private, bizarre library. He had caught his former friend at his most vulnerable and perhaps his most grotesque, surrounded by his dark obsession.
And the narrator's motivation for murder is immediate and absolute. He feels no remorse, no contrition. He processes the evidence in the room. The hideous, half-visible specimens of his surgical wizardry scattered about the room.
For him, this sight is overwhelming proof. It confirms that Andrews is a fiend who deserves immediate extermination.
It's easy to label it as necessary, but we can't ignore the raw, brutal act. Was he committing self-defense, or was this the first demonstration of this alien body's inherent violence?
That's a great question. Up until this point, he was a victim. We have to consider the environment, the torture, the animal cries, the betrayal, as justification, maybe, for that switch from victim to murderer.
And the action itself is so decisive. He stepped forward and brought the heavy candelabrum down upon Andrew's unprotected head.
The sound described is deeply visceral. A dull crunch, followed by a spurt of blood. Andrews crumpled, his head half open.
The narrator was now hideously certain he was one of Andrews's monstrous specimens, and murder was the only path to breaking free.
But the escape isn't secured yet. Symes, the complicit factotum, remains.
Faint from exhaustion, the narrator drags himself to the servant's dark bedchamber.
The confrontation is quick and terrifying. The old man screamed hoarsely. The candelabrum struck something soft, making a distinct, unnerving, sloofing sound.
Suggesting tissue or flesh, a truly gruesome detail.
But Symes kept screaming. So the narrator, driven now by pure adrenaline and the primal need for survival, grappled and choked the life from the old man.
And what's crucial here is his own observation. He notes his unexpected, frightening strength. He leaves Symes in a condition like his own, silent, inert, possibly in the same state of paralysis or death the narrator had experienced just days earlier.
This capacity for violence forces us to stop and evaluate the source of that strength. He was recently paralyzed, suffering from acute vertigo and exhaustion. Yet he successfully executed 2 brutal assaults.
To subdue the elderly, but presumably healthy, Symes, by sheer force, suggests that the new life vibrating through him was not just internal resolve. It was a terrible physical capacity.
An efficiency for violence that raises significant questions about the body he now inhabits.
Reeling, victorious but terrified, the narrator stumbles out of the manor. He seizes a piece of dead wood to use as a cane. His destination is immediate and instinctive.
The family cemetery, where his ancestors, and supposedly his corpse, lie buried.
It's only a quarter of a mile away, yet it seems impossibly distant in his weakened, exhausted state. As he traverses the path, that feeling of awful unfamiliarity persists. Everything he sees is alien and unrecognizable.
Including the body he's piloting.
Yet, as he neared the family cemetery, a strange, profound sense of homecoming grew stronger. And this is a profound paradox. Alienation mixed with disembodiment. Why would he feel at home near his grave?
It suggests an unconscious knowledge of what lies there, a pullback to his true identity or perhaps his rightful place.
He didn't need guidance. He intuitively found his own tombstone. It was easily recognizable because the grass had scarcely begun to grow between the newly replaced sod. The physical evidence of his recent interment was undeniable.
Driven by a desperate need for confirmation, he began clawing feverishly at the nitrous soil. His nails were ruined, becoming useless, bleeding hooks.
This is a man destroying himself physically to uncover the single definitive truth of his identity. Is he truly free, or was the resurrection a lie?
Finally, his fingers struck the hard wooden coffin lid.
He pauses, preparing to lift the heavy lid, when a sensory horror stops him cold. A fetid and nauseous odor assailed my nostrils.
A stench of putrescence, decay, and death, so awful and intense that it briefly overrides his focus.
His initial fear is logical. He feared he'd found the wrong grave. Had some idiot placed my tombstone on the wrong grave, causing me to unearth another body? He meticulously confirmed the headpiece was his own. He was in his family plot, under his stone.
So the question narrowed. What fool had buried within his coffin another corpse?
And then the critical, horrifying piece of recognition surfaces. All at once, the unspeakable truth propelled itself upon my brain.
The putrescent odor seemed horribly familiar.
This is a moment of pure, sickening realization, where his trauma-addled mind connects the internal feeling of alienation with the external reality of decay. He rejects the idea, but the physical reaction is irreversible. He falls back into the cavity, reeling and cursing.
He knows, even before seeing, what he will find.
He lights a match hastily, a desperate bid for truth in the darkness, and lifts the long lid completely open. He gets one definitive glimpse of the contents.
That single view is enough. The light immediately goes out, as if extinguished by a malignant hand. It's a powerful metaphor, suggesting the truth itself was extinguishing his life force.
He scrambles out of that accursed pit, screaming in a frenzy of fear and loathing. The horror wasn't just what was in the coffin. It was the definitive physical understanding of what he himself had become by comparison. He had escaped the manor, but he had not escaped Andrew's masterpiece.
The physical and mental exhaustion is total. The narrator somehow regained consciousness before the door of his own ancient manor, where he must have crawled after that hideous rendezvous in the cemetery.
Dawn was approaching, and ravaged by fever, he stumbled into his old study, the same room where Andrews had outlined the original plan.
And in that fevered, vulnerable state, all the scattered pieces of the puzzle, the clumsy hands, the loose shoes, the command to keep the blankets up, the strange strength, the familiar stench, they finally coalesced.
Illuminating Andrew's true, monstrous motive. The surgeon had meant him for a specimen all along, not a cured patient, but a masterpiece of unclean witchery. A surgical feat of perverted artistry designed only for Andrews to observe and admire.
This is the moment. The true, absolute realization of what he was hits him with the force of that candelabrum. He understands the total alienation he felt, the physiological peculiarities, all pointing to one terrible conclusion that overshadows even the leprosy.
Andrews had replaced his own body with that of another.
This identity theft was complete and physical. A horrifying switch, likely orchestrated with that Haitian drug and perhaps utilizing material Andrews acquired during his trip to the West Indies. He was literally resurrected into a foreign vessel.
The source provides the most tragic and definitive self-description of this alien body. He says, "These long, hairy arms and horrible short legs are alien to me, alien to all natural and sane laws of mankind."
This is not just clumsiness. This is a radical, fundamental shift in biological identity. He is trapped in a body that feels fundamentally wrong, grotesque, and perhaps even non-human.
The horror is multi-layered. He wasn't just trapped in a body. He was trapped in an alien body whose physical traits contradicted everything he knew about himself.
And the thought that he would be tortured with that other vessel during the rest of his brief existence is another hell. He overcame the fear of leprosy only to face the eternal fear of his new repulsive self.
Yet the irony is crushing and complete. The initial fear of leprosy is utterly overshadowed by this search for blasphemy. The focus of his existence immediately switches from surviving disease to escaping this new, forced identity.
His ultimate desire now is not to live, but for that which every man blessed of God ought to have at death.
And that desire is inextricably linked to the final grotesque vision he had in the cemetery. The source confirms the horrifying truth of the coffin's contents. What he saw in the coffin was his own original, shrunken, decayed, and headless body.
Why headless? Andrews had not just replaced the body. He had ensured the original vessel was mutilated, perhaps to prevent forensic identification if the grave was ever disturbed.
Or maybe it was the final dark flourish of his perverted artistry. The signature a mad surgeon completing his transplantation by retaining the original head, or perhaps the surgical tool of transferring the narrator's head to the new vessel.
It makes the horror complete and irreversible.
So what does this all mean for our narrator? We've witnessed a terrifying cycle orchestrated by Marshall Andrews, built on intellectual arrogance and betrayal. Fear of a deadly, shaming disease led to desperate trust in a malicious genius.
That trust led to temporary death, followed by resurrection into a state of acute physical alienation, a living blasphemy.
The curse of leprosy was effectively exchanged for the unimaginable horror of physical identity theft, leaving the narrator literally homeless within his own mind.
Every physical action, every movement, is a constant screaming reminder that the essence of who he is resides within a body that is fundamentally alien to all natural and sane laws of mankind.
The narrator's immediate future is clear, yet utterly tragic. He plans to cast his deformed self into the ancient well beneath the old willow tree before dawn breaks. This is a final desperate act of self-erasure.
He seeks oblivion, ensuring no other man views this horror, attempting to destroy the monstrous creation Andrews imposed upon him.
And finally, we circle back to that intense strength and capacity for violence the narrator displayed when killing Andrews and Symes. He overcame exhaustion and recent paralysis, and his power was effective and brutal.
Given his final realization that he was inhabiting an alien body with long hairy arms and horrible short legs, we are left with a profoundly disturbing question that sits outside the scope of his conscious actions.
Was the violent, overwhelming strength and dexterity used to commit those acts a property of the person he used to be, utilizing sheer willpower in a moment of existential crisis?
Oh, is that terrible, unnatural function a mechanical property of the new alien body he now inhabited? A strength that was, perhaps, literally alien to all natural and sane laws of mankind, and one that simply enabled the violence required to escape its monstrous creator. Something for you to consider as the dawn breaks over Hampton.